Imagine for a moment stumbling upon a personal diary, not just any diary, though, but the private, completely unguarded reflections of one of history's most powerful individuals. And it's not, a book filled with grand pronouncements or strategic battle plans or even political gossip. Instead, what you find is this collection of raw, really intimate thoughts on how to live, how to face death, and, well, how to simply be in a world that often feels defined by chaos. That's pretty much exactly what we hold in our hands with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Today we're embarking on a true deep dive into this extraordinary text. It's a work that, frankly, was never intended for public eyes. Its original title translates to himself. Just a profoundly personal record that has almost unbelievably shaped our understanding of philosophy, self-improvement, and human resilience for nearly 2,000 years. It's like this internal conversation that somehow became a guide for millions.
It truly is. And what strikes you immediately about Meditations, I think, is its sheer intimacy. It's such an unfiltered glimpse into the mind of a Roman emperor. I mean, a man who held almost unimaginable power, yet was constantly grappling, really wrestling with life's biggest questions, from the nature of existence itself to the quest for tranquility amidst relentless external pressures. Meditations is just this incredible testament to the enduring human spirit. Its sincerity, its practical wisdom, and its timeless resonance are just remarkable. It offers these profound lessons that feel incredibly relevant, almost urgent, even for us today.
So our mission for this deep dive is really to extract the most potent nuggets of wisdom, the actionable insights from this incredible source material. We're going to explore the core Stoic principles that Marcus didn't just study, but really wrestled with daily. We'll peek into his inner world, try to understand his struggles, and figure out why this ancient text, written, in the midst of global turmoil, is perhaps more pertinent than ever for navigating our own complex modern lives. So when you think about starting with something so intensely personal, from a figure of such immense historical power, what truly stands out to you? What's the hook there?
That's a great question because it really highlights how unique this work is. It's quite rare, isn't it? To have such an unfiltered window into the mind of someone facing such immense external pressures. I mean, leading an empire, constantly fighting wars, trying to survive plagues. Yet this person consistently turns inward for guidance and strength. It just raises this important question right from the start. How did this unparalleled context, the sheer weight of his imperial responsibilities and the relentless challenges of his reign, how did that truly shape the profound philosophical ideas he was wrestling with in these private reflections?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. Because before we dive into the philosophy itself, we really need to get a handle on the man in his world. Marcus Aurelius wasn't some, detached philosopher musing away in an ivory tower somewhere. He was quite literally the emperor of the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 AD. He basically had the known world on his shoulders.
Precisely. And this context is absolutely crucial for appreciating the Meditations. His reign, well, looking back, it's often seen as the height of the Pax Romana, that period of supposedly unparalleled peace and stability for the Roman Empire, a sort of golden age. But, and this is the paradox, this outwardly peaceful facade was actually marked by unprecedented turmoil for Marcus himself. While Rome's heartland might have been relatively stable, Marcus spent almost his entire reign out on the frontiers.
Right, he wasn't sitting comfortably in Rome much of the time.
Not at all. He was constantly on campaign. We're talking about the brutal Marcomannic wars along the Danube frontier, fighting Germanic tribes, and also the Parthian campaigns way out in the east. These weren't just minor border skirmishes, they were protracted, exhausting conflicts that stretched Roman military resources to their absolute limit across vast, distant territories.
And on top of the wars by plague.
Exactly. Perhaps even more profoundly, his reign was devastated by the Antonine Plague. This wasn't just a localized outbreak, it was a massive pandemic, likely smallpox or measles, historians think, that just swept across the entire empire. From east to west, it decimated populations. Estimates suggest it killed millions, possibly up to a third of the population in some heavily affected areas. Can you just imagine the sheer crushing pressure? Leading this sprawling civilization while its population is being ravaged by an unknown, unstoppable disease, and its borders are under constant military threat.
It's almost unimaginable.
It really is. Marcus Aurelius wasn't just a figurehead ruler. He was an active military commander, often physically leading his legions from temporary, probably quite rough military camps. And it's in this environment, amidst the daily chaos of war, the omnipresent shadow of plague, maybe in a cold, damp tent on some distant frontier, that he composed these intensely personal, philosophical reflections.
So this tension you're describing, it's fundamental, isn't it? Between his huge external demands as emperor managing wars, administration, this horrific pandemic, and his internal quest for peace, for virtue. This wasn't just a philosophical exercise for him, was it? It sounds more like survival.
It was absolutely a refuge. You put it perfectly. It was his anchor. This wasn't a philosophy he merely studied in his youth. It was a philosophy he actively lived. And in many ways, yeah, it was a practical philosophy for psychological survival. This context is really what makes meditation so incredibly compelling. It highlights the deeply personal nature of his struggle. A man literally trying to govern an entire world, facing these unimaginable pressures, and yet in his few quiet moments turning inward, writing this private journal, using Stoicism to maintain his sanity, his focus, his moral compass, his character.
So how did all that external chaos directly influence the internal philosophical framework he was building for himself?
Well, that's where Stoicism really comes into sharp focus, right? It wasn't just some casual intellectual interest for him. It was clearly a fundamental guiding principle, a lifeline he clung to desperately at times.
Seems like it.
Absolutely. Stoicism, which, originated way back in Athens around 300 BCE with Zeno of Citium, it provided the absolute bedrock for his entire thought process. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, it offered a worldview designed precisely for navigating hardship, for finding inner strength when external circumstances are completely overwhelming. The core Stoic tenets Marcus Aurelius applied weren't just abstract ideals you discuss in some academy. They were practical tools he internalized for his daily life, for every decision, every setback, every challenge he faced as emperor.
Okay, so what were those key tenets he kept coming back to?
Well, first and foremost was virtue as the highest good. This is central. It means true happiness, genuine well-being. It comes from cultivating one's inner character. Things like wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance or self-control, rather than from external circumstances like wealth, status, winning battles, or even being emperor. Second was the idea of accepting nature's will, or the logos. This is the Stoic belief that the universe, the cosmos, operates according to a rational, orderly, maybe even divine force or intelligence. For Marcus, aligning oneself with this cosmic order, accepting what happens as part of this larger design, was the path to tranquility, even the really difficult stuff.
So kind of going with the flow of the universe in a way.
Kind of, yeah, but a very rational, ordered flow. It meant understanding that everything that happens, even the seemingly terrible things like plagues or betrayals, is ultimately part of this larger, inherently rational, perhaps even perfect design. And finally, and this was perhaps the most crucial one for his specific context, was the dichotomy of control. This is a fundamental Stoic principle. It teaches that you should focus your energy only on what is truly within your control.
Which is?
Primarily your thoughts, your perceptions, your judgments about events, and your actions or responses. Everything else, external events, other people's actions, health, reputation, certainly plagues and wars, you have to accept as they occur, recognizing they are ultimately beyond your direct power to change.
It's really powerful that he was applying Epictetus's core lesson so directly. You have power over your mind, not external events. And what's fascinating to me is, Epictetus was a former slave.
Exactly.
So Marcus, the most powerful man in the known world, is learning profound life lessons from a man who had known the absolute opposite, the ultimate external constraint.
That's such a critical observation, and it just profoundly underscores the radical nature of the Stoic message, doesn't it? That Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, found such deep wisdom and practical guidance in the teachings of Epictetus, a man who began his life in chains, is truly remarkable. It just highlights that Stoicism's core message, that true freedom and real power reside internally, in your mind, regardless of your external circumstances or social status. It transcends all the societal divisions. It's a philosophy for anyone, anywhere, who's seeking inner resilience.
Yeah.
And Marcus truly internalized this. He saw himself, even as emperor, as just a steward upon nature's path, and he seemed to deeply believe that to govern was to accept belonging within an ordered universe. This understanding, this lived context, really sets the stage for the practical, timeless wisdom we find woven throughout his meditations. So let's actually dive into those core teachings now, the very principles that shaped his mind and, arguably, his reign.
Okay, so after setting that scene, what did the emperor himself distill as the most important lessons for living well? Especially, when the world feels like it's completely out of control, this is where it gets incredibly practical for us, I think.
He repeatedly comes back to this foundational idea that true strength, genuine power, lies entirely within oneself. This is probably the most recurrent, the bedrock theme in meditations, the dichotomy of control and internal mastery. Marcus is constantly reminding himself, and by extension us, the readers, that external events, things like a devastating plague sweeping the empire, constant warfare on the borders, or even personal betrayals and political backstabbing, are utterly beyond his direct control. His immense imperial power, being the emperor, couldn't stop the spread of disease, couldn't guarantee victory in every single battle.
Right, even he couldn't control everything.
Exactly. What he can control, what is up to us in Stoic terminology, are his thoughts, his perceptions, his judgments about these events, and ultimately his character and his responses to them. He states this fundamental truth in various ways throughout the text, but one of the most direct is, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And this isn't just some abstract philosophical concept he's playing with. For Marcus, it was a daily, rigorous practice. It was about separating what the Stoics called things indifferent, those external circumstances that are morally neutral in themselves, like health, wealth, status, even life and death, from those things that are truly good or bad, which are our internal responses, our virtues and vices, our judgments and actions.
So the end itself isn't good or bad, it's how we react to it.
Precisely.
Right.
He understood that our distress, our pain, our suffering doesn't actually come from the events themselves, but from our judgment or our interpretation of those events. An external event, say losing a battle or getting sick, is neutral until we assign meaning to it, until we decide it's terrible or unbearable.
And in today's world, I mean, with the constant barrage of information overload, the 24/7 news cycles, the pervasive influence of social media demanding our attention, and just general external stimuli coming at us from every single direction, this insight feels remarkably relevant, doesn't it? It almost feels like it directly prefigures modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, reminding us that our thoughts fundamentally shape our feelings and our behavior. It feels like a powerful antidote to that feeling of being utterly overwhelmed by everything happening outside of us.
It absolutely is. It's uncanny, really. Marcus Aurelius, writing nearly 2 millennia ago, truly understood this profound link between our inner world of thought and our outer experience of reality. When he writes something like, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes the color of your thoughts," he's essentially articulating a foundational principle of CBT. He's saying that our emotions and behaviors are largely shaped by our interpretations of events, not the events themselves. If you interpret a difficult situation as an insurmountable catastrophe, well, you're going to feel defeated and helpless. But if you interpret it as a challenge to overcome, a chance to practice virtue, you'll feel more empowered, more resilient.
Yeah, makes sense.
And for him, this wasn't just theory, it was a daily practice of vigilance over his internal dialogue. A constant, conscious redirection of focus away from the uncontrollable external world and towards the controllable internal landscape of his mind. He's essentially saying, look, if you want to improve your life, if you want to find peace amidst chaos, you absolutely must start by improving the quality of your mind, by actively policing your thoughts and judgments.
But it's not just about passively managing thoughts, is it?
Yeah.
It's about what those thoughts actually lead to in terms of action.
Exactly right. Which brings us directly to the next core theme, living with purpose and virtue. For Marcus, virtue wasn't some static concept or just a theoretical ideal you'd debate in a philosophy class. It was an active, daily striving. It was something you did. He viewed life's highest goal as cultivating virtue, specifically the 4 cardinal Stoic virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, or self-discipline, and believed this transcended all those fleeting external accomplishments like wealth, status, fame, or even imperial victories.
He seemed very aware of how short life is.
Deeply aware. He held this profound awareness of life's brevity, and this emphasized the urgency to live with intention, to make every single moment count. He tells himself, and effectively us, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Now, that might sound a bit morbid at first glance, but it's actually profoundly liberating. It's about accepting your role, whatever it is, assigned by nature, by the universe, and living authentically within that role, using your finite time for what truly matters, for acts that align with your deepest values, with virtue.
This resonates so strongly with, modern productivity literature, even mindfulness practices. In a world that feels saturated with digital distractions, constant notifications, endless feeds, and just so many avenues for superficiality, it feels like an urgent call to focus deeply on what actually matters and to act on it right now, rather than just endlessly contemplating it or getting sidetracked.
It absolutely does. Just consider the challenge he presents to himself every single morning, a challenge that is just as relevant for any of us struggling to get out of bed to face our own demanding lives. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I am rising for the work of a human being. Do I still resent going about the work for which I was born?
Wow. That's got a self-talk prompt.
It's a powerful self-interrogation, isn't it? A way to reframe that morning discomfort, not as a burden, but as an opportunity for purpose. And then there's his direct command, which truly encapsulates this active, embodied approach to virtue. It's perhaps one of his most famous and impactful lines. Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one.
Just do it.
Exactly. This isn't about endless intellectual debate or theoretical discussions about ethics. It's about embodying virtue through your actions, moment by moment, in every decision, every interaction, every single day. And a key part of that virtue for Marcus involved understanding our place in the larger scheme of things, this profound sense of interconnectedness.
Right, he constantly connected the personal to the cosmic, didn't he? This idea of belonging to something much bigger than himself, even as the emperor commanding millions. It's such a striking contrast to how many powerful figures, maybe even today, view themselves sort of separate or above it all.
It's one of the most beautiful and, I think, profoundly necessary aspects of his philosophy. Yes, his worldview is deeply holistic. He believed the universe operates according to a rational, orderly force, the logos. This wasn't just some vague mystical concept for him. It was the core Stoic idea that the cosmos is governed by an intelligent, rational principle, almost like a divine blueprint or universal reason running through everything. And for Marcus, consciously aligning oneself with this cosmic order, understanding its rationality, was the ultimate path to serenity. It meant understanding that everything that happens, even the things that seem chaotic or painful from our limited perspective, is ultimately part of this larger, perfect, rational design. He'd say things like, all things arise from the one nature shaped by its logos, and the whole universe is a living being possessing a single substance and a single soul.
And how did humans fit into that cosmic picture?
Well, within this grand design, humans are fundamentally social creatures. We're meant for communal contribution, for cooperation. He argues, quite famously, what brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee.
I love that line.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It perfectly highlights our profound interconnectedness and the idea that our individual well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole community, the whole hive. For Marcus, acting with cruelty or injustice towards others doesn't just harm the individual victim, it actually contradicts nature itself, which designed us specifically for cooperation and mutual support. So he constantly encourages himself and us to accept others' flaws, understanding that everyone is shaped by their own nature and perhaps their ignorance of the good, and to focus instead on cultivating one's own character and fulfilling one's own duties within this larger human and cosmic order. Recognizing our shared humanity is key.
You know, in an increasingly polarized world where divisions seem to just widen daily, this part of meditations feels like such a powerful, needed reminder of our shared humanity. These ideas about tolerance, universal belonging, the interconnectedness of all things, they could truly foster empathy and maybe help counter some of the fragmentation we see everywhere.
I agree completely.
And it also offers this profound counterpoint to modern consumerism and maybe even the ecological crisis we face by emphasizing our deep connection to nature itself rather than just seeing it as a resource to be exploited.
It truly does. He reminds himself, we were born for cooperation, like the feet, the hands, the eyelids, the rows of upper and lower teeth. It's such a visceral image of interdependence. And this isn't just about human connection. It's about seeing the entire universe as this single living being possessing a single substance and a single soul. It's a call to understand our inherent purpose within this grand, interconnected system. It pushes us to view ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as integral parts of a greater whole with real responsibilities to that whole. And perhaps the most challenging aspect of aligning ourselves with nature, with this logos, is accepting life's ultimate, undeniable truth.
Death. Yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from it at all, does he? In fact, he seems to confront it head on, almost keeping it as a constant companion, a reminder.
Absolutely. His reflections on mortality are incredibly deep and paradoxically really transformative. For Marcus Aurelius, death is not some anomaly, not an endpoint to be feared, certainly not a tragedy in the typical human sense. It's simply an integral part of the natural process, a return to the elements of nature from which we originally came. He firmly believed that fearing death is essentially fearing nature itself, which is both irrational, since it's inevitable, and utterly futile. He advises himself, all things arise and pass away. Do not be anxious about immortality. The present moment is enough.
So thinking about death isn't meant to be depressing.
Quite the opposite for him. This constant contemplation of mortality isn't morbid. It becomes this powerful beacon for living fully, living urgently. It imbues every action, every thought, every word with significance. By truly accepting that you could leave life right now, he ensures that this understanding profoundly determines what you do and say and think. It sharpens the focus on the present. And it served as this kind of radical equality, didn't it? It profoundly humbled the emperor, constantly reminding him that status, glory, power, all those external accolades are utterly fleeting. The emperor and the lowest soldier, the most renowned hero and the completely anonymous present, all must one day return to dust.
Strips away the ego.
Completely. And this thought wasn't meant to induce despair, but rather to strip away all those superficial concerns and clarify what truly matters: virtue, character, and how you conduct yourself in the present moment. He knew that even the longest life is just a tiny blip in eternity, and even the most enduring fame quickly fades into oblivion.
In our era, which seems obsessed with legacy, with achieving some kind of digital immortality, whether it's through technology or just our online presence, Marcus really reminds us to find meaning in virtue and internal worth right here, right now, rather than chasing those external accolades or worrying about being remembered forever. It encourages living with such profound intention and purpose every single day, precisely because each day is precious and undeniably finite.
He personally grapples with this constantly in the text. He writes things like, "Soon you will be ashes or bones, a mere name, if that. What of glory? What of immortality? All such things are vanity." It's stark. And then he presents perhaps his most profound paradox concerning mortality. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life, now live the rest of it properly. It's a jolt, isn't it? It's not a call to resignation or despair. It's this powerful, almost shocking invitation to seize the present moment and live it with utmost integrity, with virtue, as if every remaining breath is a precious gift, a bonus round you get to live correctly. These profound philosophical insights weren't just intellectual exercises floating in his head, they were deeply integrated into the very fabric of Marcus Aurelius's daily life. And understanding how he articulated them within his personal reflections, his self-talk, provides yet another really crucial layer of wisdom.
Yeah, what's so incredibly compelling about meditations is exactly that it's not some grand philosophical treatise designed for public consumption, trying to establish a school of thought or impress anyone. It feels like a personal, truly intimate dialogue he's having with himself, almost like we're reading someone's most private journal entries.
Yes, exactly. His original title, To Himself, just perfectly captures its essence, doesn't it? It operates not like a structured, linear argument, but more like a series of concentric circles. He starts with observations of external influences, maybe something someone said or did, and then gradually spirals inward to these moments of deep self-reflection, sometimes self-admonishment, and profound insight. It's composed of these fragmented, often short reflections, sometimes just a sentence or two, other times a longer paragraph, rather than formal, logically connected arguments. And Marcus frequently, almost constantly, addresses himself directly in the second person. "You have power over your mind," or "do not be disturbed," or "remember this."
Which makes it feel so immediate.
It really does. That technique transforms abstract philosophy into this deeply personal, ongoing internal dialogue. It effectively invites the reader, invites you directly into the emperor's struggle, making it a kind of mirror for your own internal landscape. The fragments themselves almost mimic the rhythm of daily thoughts and struggles, capturing moments of raw vulnerability alongside moments of startling clarity. Each entry kind of operates like a little scene in a larger internal drama, revealing a life shaped by these moments of doubt, profound weariness, and then often eventual affirmation and resolve. And the repetition of themes like mortality or the pursuit of virtue or the dichotomy of control, it isn't redundant. Rather, it feels like it serves to deepen his own convictions. It highlights that self-mastery is a continuous, lifelong practice, not some fixed destination you arrive at. It's as if he's actively carving these truths into his own soul, repeatedly reminding himself of the principles he absolutely needs to live by day in and day out.
And this intimate format, this kind of raw self-talk, it reveals a really profound humility, doesn't it? Which seems so rare, almost paradoxical, in someone who wielded such immense, essentially absolute power. It's striking. Here's the most powerful man in the world, the Emperor of Rome, and yet he's constantly reminding himself of his own smallness, his own insignificance in the grand scheme of things.
It truly is remarkable, and his humility wasn't just, a virtue he aspired to in theory. It seems like it was a fundamental aspect of his psychological shield, a cornerstone of his internal discipline. Despite his imperial status, despite all the pomp and circumstance and privilege that came with it, he constantly reminds himself that external power and glory are ultimately ephemeral, fleeting, and frankly, meaningless if internal discipline and virtue are lacking. He understood that true wealth wasn't found in the imperial treasury or the number of legions he commanded, but in the richness of his own character.
He even lists people he's grateful to, right?
In the beginning, yes. In Book 1, which is a truly remarkable section, he dedicates several pages to acknowledging the profound debts he owes to those who shaped him. It's almost like a personal gratitude list. He names his grandfather Verus, his father, by adoption, the previous emperor Antoninus Pius, his mother, and several influential teachers like Rusticus and Fronto. He praises Verus, for example, for teaching him good character, a mild temper, and a serene demeanor, his adoptive father Antoninus for modesty, integrity, and discipline, and his mother for teaching him piety, generosity, and aversion not only to wrongdoing, but even to the thought of it. This act of publicly, even if only public to himself in his journal, acknowledging his intellectual and moral mentors demonstrates such a profound lesson in humility and recognizing our human interconnection.
It shows he didn't think he achieved it all himself.
Not at all. And he constantly reflects on the fleeting nature of power, how quickly the emperor too will be forgotten. All glory is ephemeral, all status dust. This radical self-awareness, this deep understanding that all human achievements dissolve within the sands of time. It seems like it stripped away any illusions of ego or grandiosity, allowing him to focus instead on what genuinely endured his character and his actions in the present moment.
And this deep humility must have profoundly shaped his view of leadership itself, right? Shifting it away from a position of just domination or command towards something more like genuine service. So what did all this deep internal work actually mean for how he tried to govern this massive empire?
That's a critical link to make, because he provides this timeless model for leaders really across all disciplines, emphasizing self-governance and internal mastery above everything else. For Marcus, true power didn't rest in external authority or the title of emperor or the ability to command legions. It rested squarely within one's own character, one's thoughts, and one's virtue. He's constantly asking himself variations of what can one govern but one's own thoughts? What can one rule but one's character? This was clearly his primary focus, recognizing that he couldn't truly lead others effectively or justly if he couldn't first lead himself.
So rule yourself first.
Exactly. And he fundamentally reframes rulership itself as service to the whole, to the hive, as he put it. He viewed the emperor not as some absolute monarch standing above everyone else, but as one node within nature's design, ultimately a servant to the whole. And this perspective seems to emerge directly from his open grappling with immense personal trials, the tragic deaths of beloved friends and family, including several of his own children, the betrayals by those he trusted, the horrifying ravages of the plague across his empire, and the constant grinding threat of war. These hardships didn't seem to make him bitter or tyrannical, which could easily have happened. Paradoxically, they seemed to deepen his commitment to accepting nature's will and his own necessary yet limited role within it.
It tempered him, maybe?
It seems so. His profound paradox, which feels like a guiding principle for ethical leadership, is essentially this. True strength rests upon accepting limitation. True authority rests upon accepting belonging. True leadership rests upon accepting service. It's counterintuitive but powerful. And he constantly reminds himself, and by extension, all of us who might find ourselves in positions of influence, to perform every action as if it were your last, speak every word as if it were your final thought, govern every moment as if nature herself were witness. It's this deep psychological insight, this hard-won, lived wisdom that makes meditations not just some historical curiosity, but a surprisingly potent and ever-relevant guide for navigating our own complex, often messy, modern world.
Okay, so after nearly 2,000 years, why does this ancient text, this personal diary written by a Roman emperor, often in pretty harsh conditions in military tents, why does it still captivate us so profoundly? What's its enduring power for you as a listener today, trying to make sense of your own life and challenges?
Well, I think its psychological resonance is truly uncanny. It prefigures so much of what we now value in modern well-being practices in psychology. Marcus Aurelius' approach parallels contemporary practices like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and mindfulness in these striking, almost prophetic ways. He understood with remarkable clarity, centuries before modern psychology formalized it, that our thoughts fundamentally shape our perceptions of reality. He knew that external events are, in themselves, fundamentally neutral until they are judged by our internal faculties, by our minds. And he understood that tranquility, real peace of mind, is found by rigorously focusing on the present moment and concentrating only on what is truly within our control, our thoughts, judgments, and actions.
The CDT connection seems really strong.
It's incredibly strong. When he writes in Book 2, the things you think about determine the quality of your mind, he's articulating a core tenet of CBT. challenge your rational thoughts, reframe your negative perceptions, and you can improve your emotional regulation simply by changing your cognitive patterns. And his advice to retire into yourself at any time, book 4, to find this inner sanctuary regardless of external chaos, directly echoes modern meditation and mindfulness practices. He's advocating for finding an internal refuge from external turmoil.
Yeah, that's very mindfulness-oriented.
Absolutely. Furthermore, his reflections on death, which we talked about how they foster urgency and purpose in life, they also mirror modern therapeutic practices like existential therapy that use mortality awareness to cultivate clarity, gratitude, and a deeper appreciation for life. And his worldview, this idea where every person plays an integral, purposeful role within a larger, interconnected whole, it profoundly prefigures someone like Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, which asserts that meaning can be found in any circumstance, no matter how dire, primarily by choosing one's attitude and finding a sense of purpose. His constant insistence that true strength rests within is just such a powerful, timeless antidote to the anxiety and overwhelm so many feel in our fast-paced, often chaotic world. It really empowers the individual in a way few other ancient philosophies do.
And beyond just personal well-being, it seems like meditation speaks to some of the larger societal issues we're grappling with right now, offering guidance for navigating the collective challenges of our time as well.
It absolutely does. I think Meditations offers wisdom that directly addresses some of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, making it incredibly relevant beyond individual psychology. It's a powerful guide for building emotional resilience in times of widespread anxiety, information overwhelm, and even collective trauma, precisely because it teaches us to reframe our perceptions of external events and focus our energy on what we can actually control: our responses, our character. In an era that often feels saturated with digital distraction, constant noise, and pervasive superficiality, it reminds us of the profound importance of mindful action, of internal mastery over fleeting impulses, and of living a life guided by purpose, not just momentary whims.
And the connection to nature.
Yes, Marcus's holistic view, his belief that all things arise from nature and return to it, provides this profound ethical stance against environmental degradation and runaway consumerism. It does this by emphasizing our deep connection to and our responsibility within nature itself, not seeing ourselves as separate from or dominant over it. And for leaders in any field, whether it's business, community organizing, politics, whatever, it provides this timeless guide for integrity, humility, and genuine service. It urges them to focus on internal mastery, on their own character, and on purposeful action amidst all the external noise, the ego traps, and the pressures towards superficiality.
That line again.
Right, that powerful direct call. Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one. This isn't just a personal exhortation, it's a direct challenge to meaningful action, not just endless contemplation or debate. It's a call that can inspire real societal change, one virtuous act at a time, starting with ourselves.
However, as with any ancient text, especially one written by someone from such a radically different era and social structure, we really must read it with a critical eye, mustn't we? No text is perfect, and certainly not one penned by a Roman emperor nearly 2 millennia ago. What are some of the limitations or potential criticisms of Meditations that we should probably keep in mind?
That's a crucial point, absolutely. It's so important to acknowledge the historical context. While it's rightly celebrated for its profound insights, Meditations is not without its nuances. And it's vital we read it with an awareness of its origins and potential blind spots. Critics, quite fairly, often note that Marcus's reflections arise from a position of immense, almost unimaginable privilege as emperor. He had access to the best education, resources, leisure time for philosophical reflection, and a degree of authority that was simply unavailable to the vast majority of people living in the Roman Empire.
So his perspective might be limited by that privilege.
It's possible. This position potentially led him to overlook, or perhaps simply not fully address, some of the glaring systemic injustices prevalent within the Roman Empire, most obviously, the brutal institution of slavery, which was fundamental to the Roman economy, or the widespread and deeply ingrained gender discrimination of the era. His personal ethical code, while incredibly rigorous for himself, still operated within the accepted and often deeply unjust societal norms of his time.
Okay. What else?
Well, furthermore, his hierarchical worldview, this idea that all things have their place and role within nature, while it certainly provided him with cosmic solace and a sense of order, could potentially be seen by some today as implicitly justifying unequal social arrangements if it's interpreted too rigidly or taken out of context. If everything just has its natural place, does that imply one should simply accept their lot in life, even if that lot is profoundly unjust or oppressive?
That could lead to passivity.
Exactly. And related to that, the profound focus on internal mastery and the acceptance of external circumstances, which is really a cornerstone of Stoicism, might be interpreted by some critics as being quietist or even apolitical. Some might argue that this kind of detachment from external circumstances, while potentially offering personal peace, could inadvertently lead to passivity in the face of injustice. It might potentially hinder active resistance against oppression or collective struggles for necessary social change. For example, when you're confronted with systemic injustices in our modern world, racism, poverty, climate change, a strict, perhaps unnuanced adherence to just accepting your lot might discourage the necessary collective action needed for broader social transformation.
And the underlying philosophy itself, the logos.
Right. The Stoic metaphysical framework itself, this core belief in a rational, orderly, perhaps even benevolent logos that governs the entire universe, might also be challenging for many modern secular or skeptical readers to fully accept. This deep faith in an inherently rational and fundamentally good cosmic order can be difficult to reconcile with the apparent chaos, randomness, and immense suffering we often witness in the world, especially when confronted with realities like, say, the climate crisis or widespread social collapse, which can often seem anything but orderly or just.
So it's a balance.
It really is. Meditations encourages readers to find that balance, to accept external circumstances we cannot change while simultaneously cultivating internal virtue and strength. But it's absolutely vital for us as modern readers to critically consider when acceptance might shade into complacency and when active collective change is not only possible but ethically necessary. We need to understand where the limits of individual internal mastery lie when we're faced with deeply entrenched systemic issues. Hashtag outro.
So after this deep dive, what does this all really mean for you listening right now? Meditations isn't merely some historical artifact, gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. It feels like a living, breathing guide, a profound mirror for our own anxieties, our own fears, and our deepest aspirations. It feels like a practical map towards a life rooted in virtue, resilience, and maybe even a measure of tranquility, regardless of what the often chaotic external world throws our way.
It truly captures a timeless human struggle, doesn't it? That constant tension between external circumstance and internal conviction. That perpetual search for meaning within the grand sweep of nature and the stark, unavoidable reality of mortality. And that relentless daily endeavor to cultivate virtue, to be a good person, even amidst adversity and chaos. Its enduring strength, I think, lies in its profound sincerity, its deep psychological insight, and its unflinching exploration of what it truly means to live and, ultimately, to die well.
The Emperor's Private Words, written almost 2,000 years ago, they invite you to grapple with these very same fundamental questions for yourself, right now, in your own life. In a world that often feels dominated by external noise, by digital distraction, by a pervasive sense of disconnection from ourselves and from each other, Marcus Aurelius reminds us of a profound and enduring truth.
That we truly do have dominion over ourselves, over our thoughts, our perceptions, our judgments, and ultimately our character. We can choose to accept life and death not as enemies, but as natural interconnected threads within nature's grand design. We can find belonging, enduring meaning, and profound tranquility by consciously, deliberately aligning ourselves with virtue, with reason, and with the harmonious flow of nature itself.
So the question remains, what will you choose to embody and cultivate from this deep dive into an emperor's private thoughts? How will you use this ancient insight, this timeless wisdom, to cultivate your own internal strength, your own resilience, and make your unique mark on the world, one mindful, virtuous action at a time? This quiet, profound conversation across the ages about what it truly means to live well continues, and with your understanding, you are now very much a part of it.